Right. They're not really, it's not a conscious thing that they're aware that they're being used for frauds. It's just, maybe they're co-opted, their contractors to do certain things. It's not like a conscious thing. Oh, I'm going to be this band of music, I like playing music. Oh, okay, I'm after the Beatles, let's go and brainwash America. It's not like that.
Well, maybe the generations removed, but they were part of a very deliberate project, the Frankfurt School, like Schoenberg, who I studied, I don't know if you've heard of him. Schoenberg, for example, was a really talented pianist, and basically had a choice of going with Wagner or Brahms, and chose Wagner deliberately. In his view also, he said music is man's cry of despair about discovering human condition. So I don't know if he personally decided he was going to destroy something beautiful, or it just became his outlook that music was supposed to be hideously ugly. But it definitely was a chosen point of view. And a lot of these people a lot of these people were around circles supporting the Nazis in the original. But then what happens is the way it became popular, like when I was a music student, or when I was in high school, I used to like try and compose music, and then I went to this Performing Arts Academy, and then they had a so-called student composer who wrote a string quartet that won a national prize. So they had the student string quartet play his piece, and it was one of these really ugly modern things. And I said, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. So then I started writing all this ugly modern stuff, right? So of course, I wasn't myself saying I'm going to do stuff that's ugly, but you had massive cultural pressure, and maybe the people who have all that money to give those prizes are the ones who want, like most of the rap music labels, you know who owns them? Seagram's. Canadian bootlegging gin, Seagram's whiskey.
Oh, yeah.
They own most of the rap record labels. Right? So that doesn't mean that everyone involved in rap music wants to be satanic, but it does mean there's a guy at the top saying, this is a really good way to...
Yeah. I think it kind of alludes to the transcendent nature of thought, where they can transfer from top to bottom, and this ability that needs to be influenced.
Right. Yeah, and so I think you can also see that if you had like a Kennedy or someone, or think of Martin Luther King, well, he was such a powerful leader, and he was so dignified, and his wife was an opera singer, actually, right? So when people see that, they say, I want to be like that, right? So you see someone who's inspired to do good, and it does resonate with people, which I think is also why they wanted to assassinate people like that. What, Marty?
What do you have to say about Stephen Glass?
About what?
Glass.
Oh, Glass, the so-called composer? I mean, I don't know why he decided to be so awful, but, I mean, that is like computer music. Philip Glass, isn't it?
Philip.
Yeah, do people know his music? It repeats, it's called minimalist, and it just does the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And then you add things.
His most famous piece, probably, most familiar piece, is 4 minutes, 33 seconds. This is just 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence.
Wasn't that Cage?
No,
Yeah.
Yeah, we showed that.
Yeah, I showed that once, yes. Yeah. What, Steve?
So this quote about from Adorno, he said the thing about snow is black, right?
That was Russell.
Oh, yeah, okay. So is that metaphor? Is he talking about, like, just as an example, like, we're going to be able to convince people of things that they will believe are completely the contrary? It wasn't necessarily snow is black, and that's the overall.
Right, no, it was, I mean, think about it now. Think about these poor people who feel like they still have to support Obama.
Right.
Who say, you say, well, we just murdered Gaddafi. I know, but he was a terrorist, right? Or the people who were totally against Cheney and Bush, and when we used drones to kill U.S. citizens, oh no, they were terrorists, we had to do it.
Right.
So people have been induced to say the exact opposite, to become the exact opposite what they were before. Rod?
One of my friends for years has been into various causes for people's rights, you know, supports the ACLU and other things. When we were discussing the last edition of the Patriot Act that Obama passed,
Yeah.
and how horrible it is, and everything else, he defended Obama's passing the Patriot Act on the basis, you know, that, well, you're dealing with the terrorists, which is a different set of rules, and therefore you got to deal with them differently.
Right. But that is Bertrand Russell.
Not
That's
realizing
explicitly.
the Constitution
Right.
is above and beyond that.
Right.
You
No,
know?
it takes Eugene.
Well, the WC, I found to be impressionistic in a sense. It's like the impressionist artist.
Okay.
That you
What's
see in
now?
Ravel,
Let me
but
ask you
I
that.
don't think it was that degrading.
What's the point of impressionism?
Well, it's something different. It's a departure from the other styles, from classical. It's a
Okay,
different
what's the
style
effect?
of painting.
All
That
right.
would be-
What's the difference between the WC and the Bach?
Well, the Bach was more creative in a sense.
Well, that's just
But
what it
it also was a repetition of the same melody, but it modulated to different keys and different instruments came in. It was more varied in a sense.
Right,
whereas
it's more
the
creative.
WC
No, it
was
is
more
creative.
But I don't think the music was that degrading.
Well, how did you like the choreography?
On the
The WC, yeah, because that's the whole, see, what is impression? That's part of the idea. Oh, I'm just so mellow. How about those people who are so mellow? Oh, I don't let it get to me. Oh, just, you know, take a bong hit or whatever. Just relax, be mellow, don't get all jacked up. That's part of this. That's the destruction. People think if you are impassioned about something, what do people say? You're a fanatic. You're a fanatic. You're saying there's going to be world. That's just fanatical. Well, there is going to be a nuclear. What the? You know, and you think you can change it? One person can change anything? You're brainwashed. Right.
Just relax.
Right. Exactly.
We'll see how it plays out.
When you say it's conspiracy, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're a conspiracy. You always talking that stuff.
Right. Now me, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just wear clothing that was painted on with various things hanging out and have spiked pink hair and love rap music, but I am a rebel. I mean, it really, it's just, and you saw this with what they did with the Occupy Wall Street, this thing, it was so, the slut march, where all these women went and took off half their clothes or all their clothes, and what's the point? Because someone was raped, a woman was raped, and the police said it was her fault for dressing like a slut. Well, obviously that's outrageous, but running around naked is not a way of addressing the fact that there's a certain dignity of being a human being which should be respected. So you're going to degrade yourself more. I mean, and that's how they do these games. So everyone gets more and more confused about what is the nature of being a human being and not being an animal. And think about how you push things like the idea that people who are elderly are a waste of money. Well, why? Because they're not attractive. Because if you're 97 years old, you know what? You might be missing a few teeth. Your hair might have fallen out. You may not be beautiful. But what is in your mind? What's in your soul? What are you able to contribute to the population? So the idea, I mean, the first time I ever heard Obama say this thing about how most of the money in Medicare is spent on people in their last 2 years of life. And you say, duh, I mean, doesn't that make sense? If you're sick, if you're near death, that you need more money spent on you to stay alive? But no, the view they're pushing is that's a bad thing. What's your quality of life? Do you have a feeding tube? Oh, that's so degraded, you should just die. Are you missing an arm? Oh, that's terrible, that's really unsightly. Why don't you go on a morphine drip?
They were saying they're not productive for society.
Yeah.
They're worsening.
Right. Yeah, and it's also Marty,
You know, for eons, for tens of thousands of years, for primitive tribes and ancient societies, the wisdom of the elder is always respected. And that is because there are things in life that you can't experience, you have to experience. I mean, there's a very simple example. You can't teach someone about sex. You tell them how it works, but you can't teach them
that's not the most elevated example.
about it.
It's also not uniquely
It's the
human, but I'll let it go.
Just watch the nature video.
It's emotional.
I don't know, to watch the nature video. One
And
second
when
part.
you talk to older people, and I've always made it something that I like to do, you learn. You learn.
Yeah. Well,
You know, it's something that's almost forgotten.
well, there's certain things where you really see this, like the people who built nuclear power plants or actually did things where they were hands-on, because you run into problems that you have no way of predicting. You cannot construct a computer to tell you what you're going to run into. And they had this very humorous thing that happened with the Mercedes company where they decided to just do benchmarking, but they didn't want to spend the money to produce a car and do actual road tests. So what they did was they said, well, we've programmed everything into the computer, and the car with the cheaper axles performs perfectly, and we're going to go out and mass produce these cars. Well, fine. So they made a whole bunch of the cars, and it turned out if you were going over 35 miles an hour and turned a corner, the car would turn over. And it was a total, because the computer doesn't know anything but what you put in it. So if you don't know it, how is the computer going to figure out what you don't know? And that's where, like, these whole apprenticeship, the fact that we have all these people who are employed productively, who are highly skilled, who are 60 and 70 years old, and we're not going to put them use what they know. We're not going to build anything now. We're going to let them all die and start with a whole bunch of people who've been through this garbage, who don't even know what side of a blueprint to read, and try and organize a recovery. I mean, that's a real question. Why we have to do this, besides the fact we're about to have nuclear war, but I mean, just in terms of the resource base of people who know things. Yeah.
Here's, I'm getting that that's like a theme here about nuclear war. I totally understand the
Yeah.
level of arms this world has. It's not necessary. But is that, does it really feel that that's imminent? Because I think the population, it's like holding a mirror. Like, wow, what are we really stepping into? But the population of the world doesn't, as a majority, want that. However, I mean, if
Right.
it were to happen, it's like, if it were to happen, it would be like that, wake up call, like, oh, wow, what are we doing?
Or we'd be dead. We wouldn't be awake.
Yeah.
No, it is.
It would be a put down call.
It is eminent, and it's not a perpetual thing, but it is because of the collapse of the transatlantic financial system. And LaRouche's point that they assassinated Gaddafi because to have him alive and have a trial or something like that would have delayed the ability to invade Iran and Syria.
You
And
know he was assassinated by
Yes.
people.
he was killed.
Well, he was killed, but like,
It was a decision of the French and the U.S. to kill him. Absolutely. That would never have just happened.
I mean, like through the UN, when they, make their deals, they decided to go.
Well, it's
It's
more-
probably a
No, it
discussion like outside the classroom.
No, it was the decision because he was a war crime. You could never just commit a war crime like that unless the U.S. decided that that was going to be the policy.
Right, no, I agree with that.
And this motorcade was bombed by U.S. drones.
Yeah,
Just
I mean,
driving away with.
I was watching all these videos online too.
Yeah.
I tracked.
But they did that because the timing to either get Israel to attack Iran or stage some other incident where this thing will very quickly escalate because Iran and Syria are not Iraq. And the Russian foreign minister already said an attack on Iran is an attack on Russia. Plus, we're putting all of our anti-nuclear ballistic missile systems right up against Russia's border in Eastern Europe.
And Russia's lying Syria right now.
Yeah.
Well, and China for specific progress orientation. They want to take the world to the moon. They want to orient humanity to these bigger policies, these new technologies, the old Kennedy process of development. And the British Empire fears that if the United States was under LaRouche's guidance and under a policy initiative that reflected his insights and policies, then they would be put out of business. With Glass-Steagall and a credit system, you can put this whole financial system out of business. If you put that out of business, the British Empire has no mechanism to control governments.
Yeah, I read that, absolutely.
Right.
So
And they
it's
also-
coming when Russia is orienting in this direction. It's not happening in a vacuum, so to speak.
If the U.S. were to work with China and Russia on these kind of really optimistic advanced projects, the whole geopolitical balance. Exactly, because people would say, why should I be living like this when I could orient toward this? No one would want to be part of the Commonwealth anymore.
It's sort of like the gridlock of information flow, which always comes from the top tier from down. So these policies are set at a national, supranational government level, and fed through the governments. So even in China, where they might have an evolved idea of what they want their society to become, they still have the government to contend with this communist, and that's
Well, it's a little...
that suppresses human rights. So
It's a little different. I mean, first of all, this talk about human rights, given what the U.S. is doing, is a little wild.
really atrocious.
I mean,
The
you
United
know,
States governments,
Yeah.
people everywhere are good, but governments are
But
backward.
no.
They're acting through their.
governments are necessary. Otherwise, we would never have 7 billion people on the planet. So you need government. You need government to defend the good, because otherwise it's survival of the fittest. So whoever has the most money, the biggest army, like the British East India Company, right? So you would have a government, you want to have a nation state to protect the population from whoever has the greatest so-called strength. But it's very complex. It is also a cultural question. I mean, I think this whole thing about Americans rejecting fascism is very interesting, and it's sort of part of a long history going back to why we decided to create this republic, why we fought the British, and then that they said we got to crush this influence. See, they don't, Russia and China alone are not a threat because of the various different cultural problems they have, but in coordination with the United States, that is a real threat. And the British Empire does have a policy of massive depopulation, so they wouldn't mind getting rid of 5 or 6 billion of what they view are excess people. On the other hand, LaRouche shifted a little bit what he's saying, which I found interesting, which is much more along this Bertrand Russell line, which is that they're prepared to go for nuclear war. They don't really want that. Their first choice would be the nations would just submit. Like if you could get China and Russia to do what the European Union did. Just, you know, form a global government, drop their living standard, forget about outer space, and just, then they wouldn't have to go for nuclear war.
That was almost heartening to hear.
But but they don't mind using that option. They don't think it's a bad thing that that's what we're on the brink of. But it's not a perpetual state. It's really since the murder of Gaddafi through now, we've been in this danger. They really wanted to start it last November, and the U.S. military and people in Israel, not the current prime minister, but others just said, no, this is nuts. So you have them dragging their feet and pulling it back. The U.S. military just delayed a major exercise, which could have been really a trigger. We were going to send 9,000 troops to Israel to do major war exercises while the Iranians are doing their war exercises. You'd have a perfect, one little spark and the whole thing would blow up. And the military insisted on delaying it at least 6 months, maybe longer. But LaRouche's point is that as long as Obama is president, because he is such a tool of these British interests, that it's like letting the Queen have her hand on the U.S. nuclear arsenal. That as long as he's there, you can't really control it, no matter how much the military want to stop it.
Yeah, but is Obama any more a tool of what is described as the British Empire as George Bush or anybody apart from the genuinely great American presidents? I mean, who among the current crop of contenders would be any different? That's the question I'm posing.
No, that's not the question.
That's what I'm posing.
Okay, but I'm saying that's not a question. They're all part of it.
So if you don't get Obama, who you will get?
No, we have to force him out now. That's why he has to go now.
By what methods?
Impeachment or removal under the 25th Amendment. That he's insane. He's not.
So you have to consider what you're going to replace it with.
Biden.
And you have to consider.
No, but that's the Constitution.
You also have to consider what are the real options.
That is the only option.
Because I do not, in my humble judgment,
yeah,
I do not see anybody among the current contenders who are so dramatically different.
Why is that the choice?
Yeah. I'm not proposing that as a choice. I'm saying that's a challenge.
You don't challenge to capitulate. That's not a challenge. A challenge is solving the problem.
What, Jessica?
That's the point I'm making.
Go
the
ahead,
challenge
Jessica.
is to solve the problem.
Jessica has something to say. Go ahead, Jessica.
In responding to you, in getting rid of Obama, you're saying that what's the other choices?
That's right.
Okay.
And that's the challenge. The challenge is if we decide that we have to replace Obama for the reasons we are given.
The choices would emerge because even if we did have Biden, let's say, even if we did have Biden is not directly under the control of the British Empire. You may think that all these people are, but they're not. George Bush is the same as Obama was, except for one important difference. Obama's worse. Obama is actually under the control of these people that want to start not just a nuclear war, but want to kill about 6 billion people, want to keep Europe under their control, want to ruin sovereign nations, want to recolonize Africa, and all of these other things that are just as heinous as anything.
Recolonize Africa? Africa is
so
completely
if you have a
colonized.
shift, as soon as you get rid of the person that is leading it, in any situation, as soon as that leader who is doing all of these things is removed, other things start to fall into place. You don't know exactly what's going to fall into place, but it's got to be better than that. Why do we have to have the lesser of two evils? We don't have to have an evil at all. So people that keep saying, oh, well, he's the lesser of two evils, why do we have to have an evil to pick from? So that's the point. Getting rid of him, why should we say, oh, well, what will happen after that? We won't have him. That's what will happen after that. And something else better, even Biden, would actually come along and be better. We won't have this risk hanging over our heads. We won't have $27 trillion that Obama continued from the Bush era hanging over our heads. So we have to think of it that way, not, oh, well, we can pick the lesser of two evils and put this person here and wonder what he's going to do next.
No, you're putting words in my mouth. That's not what I'm saying.
No, I'm telling you the answer.
No,
I'm
that's
not
not
saying
what
those
you
words in your mouth. Those words in my mouth.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the real challenge.
But that's the challenge.
The real challenge emerges from the fact that we have been so dumbed down over the years that there's a real dearth of leaders of the quality required to make a difference.
Hold that thought, Christine.
That's a real challenge.
I kind of feel bad for some of you here. I don't really know everybody here.
feel bad.
Talking a lot. But I think that everybody, obviously we're here. That's some very important things. We come together as a, country people to discuss. Everybody's, I'm sure, got really good ideas. And I'd like to hear what everybody's got to say. But, we say, when somebody says, well, we have to get impeachment now. And then somebody says,
end up with the exact same economic policy. It's
He'd
not.
probably argue effectively.
Well, he's effective in that he's standing up against the war, which is useful. But his policy would be a disaster.
Okay, there's no other alternative. Realistically, the amount of time to take, like, if we want, okay, so let's say it's possible to reach Obama. Okay, so what is the plan of action? Each of us now says, okay, let's go and do our diligent work. We go, we wake up lines, we open lines, we have to do it one by one. We have to put people over to this idea that Obama is bad for the country. If we don't get him out of office in November, right, then we have to do it beforehand or right after that, right? Okay, so that would be all of our work together doing that. If that works, then we get him out. Well, what's wrong with an alternative that we said people now, the person who's in office reflects the conscious state of mind of the country?
Exactly.
Okay, so if somebody is in office who's a constitutionalist, that represents our understanding of our own rights, I mean, that's a dramatic leap forward.
Yeah, and it would be revolutionary.
No, don't get me wrong, I am not defending Obama. I am saying we have a real challenge. I'm
Wait a second,
I'm
Alvin
not
wants
defending
to say
Obama.
something. Alvin, go ahead.
On the heels of what you're saying, one of the things Lynn has pointed out, laid out on numerous occasions, is that you have a government in waiting, so to speak, of people. Look, this guy's got a stranglehold on folks, and intelligence reports that Lynn puts out are saying that, you know, people's lives are threatened to speak out. People are really afraid. And then a move toward impeachment, just the move itself, the filing of it, would completely change the dynamics of politics in America, or at least allow for that to come forward. And people that we don't know, Lynn had a very interesting thing that I'd never heard of before, because you can get a bipartisan ticket together. That really blows my mind. Where you get the best, because it's not about parties, it's about principles.
Yeah, there's
So
actual
that-
organization campaigning for a ticket of that kind.
Those kind of potentialities are opened with a move against Obama, with the right people, and it only takes a couple to start that process. The empire is ready to fall. Obama's ready to go. We just have to muster up within ourselves and our population to, as this young lady was saying, and as Jessica has done, put a foot up the ass of our elected officials and show them that we're serious.
Exactly.
And then you have Lynn organizing, doing all he can, and the organization in Washington, because when Lynn put that mustache on Obama in April of '09, all contact shut down. They had a complete freak out and meltdown, and that's it. No phone calls, anything. Well, you're almost 3 years later, and people are saying, you know what, let them back in. Now, they're not yet ready to impeach, but at least we're in there pushing them again, because reality has really forced them, they're scared.
Right, there's one thing I want to add right there, which is many people here may not know who Jacques Cheminade is. He is the head of our organization in France. And in 1995, which was the year after LaRouche got out of prison here, for people who may or may not know, LaRouche was put in prison under the Bush senior administration. He was given a 15-year jail sentence. Henry Kissinger wrote letters saying keep him in there for the whole time. He was released under Clinton. And anyway, it was a big witch hunt. We can discuss if people have questions. But later in '95, Jacques Cheminade ran a very successful campaign for president of France. And in France, the government finances your elections. It's not like here where you're out to raise tons of money from corporations, so people all get coverage, but you have to demonstrate you have a certain percentage of the vote, and you have to get on the ballot, which he did. You have to get signatures of 500 mayors. So what they did in France is they made up some case saying he really didn't have enough support, even though he'd gotten all the signatures, and therefore he had ripped off the government of all the money that went into his election, and they declared him bankrupt, and they took all of his property. They just crushed him. They took all his books, his family, everything. He was reduced to bankruptcy. Now, Jacques Cheminade is running for president again, and he got the 500 signatures from the mayors, and the national French news media is covering his campaign, and they had a hilarious cartoon with Marie Le Pen, who supposedly is, you know, well, she's sort of a right-wing whatever, she's, anyway, considered more mainstream than Jacques Cheminade. She couldn't get the 500 signatures. So they have a cartoon in the major French media of her looking at the mirror saying, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the best candidate of them all? And the mirror says, well, Jacques Cheminade got the 500 signatures. Right? So it is also this question of the time when you get to a point where the population won't take it anymore, and these little sparks of leadership, like what you're saying, where people decide we can do this, where suddenly that becomes the overwhelming. So here's a guy they threw everything at him, they took all his property, made him bankrupt, dragged him through, you know, and now he's getting major media coverage, and he's seen as one of the major candidates for the presidency of France. So it's a total shift.
That's after the escape.
I just wanted to quickly add that I was also on Monday in Columbia. Is that where you were? The Civil Liberties Tour. We saw Bruce Fein speak, who was involved in the he was one of the prosecutors who impeached Nixon, and he was one of the people who was involved in that. And he pointed out, he called for Obama's impeachment strongly, and he's been in Washington for 40 years and 45 years. And he said that. He pointed out that immediately after Nixon's impeachment, all of a sudden, the leaders following had to keep in mind this question of impeachment, because all of a sudden it was a reality, because it had been brought to the table. And the point is that we're bringing it to the table, and we're putting it there, and we're making it part of the reality. And once it becomes part of it, then it's something that Obama has to contend with, and it's something that will take away the political capital that he has today, and that will allow things to shift and open up so that new leaders can come up.
Well, it's also the reality is also to sustain confidence in people that they can do those things. That's part of the problem. Right? The American population don't feel it can do certain things. They don't feel that it has a right to participate in the political process. Right? Because the political process is completely corrupted by big money. Completely.
Well, that's changing. It is
right?
changing. And also, don't forget, I'm running for Congress, so just be careful what you say.
That's what we're doing. That's our goal.
No, but it's a fact.
I know, but I'm telling you.
I mean, we have.
What's just this last thing, and then we're going to break up. And I just want to say, next Saturday, a week from today, we are holding a meeting in New Jersey, which is a campaign meeting, but LaRouche is going to address it by Skype, and Keisha Rogers, who's running for Congress in Texas, is having a meeting at the same time. So it'll be New Jersey, Texas, and Mr. LaRouche hooked up. And people who want to go should make sure that Scott in the back has your information, because we'll have carpools from New York. People can get a ride from like 42nd and 9th or whatever to get over there. Yes, do you have something?
I am a big believer that reasonable people come to the same conclusions with the same information, and truth is what we're all seeking. And okay, so the American population has been conditioned, so that means to think it through what's the next step, so we uncondition our fellow Americans. And as far as the economics, it's a long discussion with a lot of constructive dialogue that takes time, but ultimately I think there may be, Austrian economics might be misunderstood, because ultimately it believes in people agree. That's fundamental. But and then you get rid of the mechanism of credit. So, right, that's
We can
and then
take it
that's
up
a step
in a
along the
longer
evolution
discussion.
toward a non-economic system.
Yeah, we'll
Eventually you get there.
we'll take it up in a longer discussion. No, that's it. I'm being authoritarian and ending the meeting. No more questions.